During COVID, a lot of people got dogs. And so then there was like an upswing in purchasing of pets. And so a lot of people had puppies. And then now we've got maybe not as many animals leaving shelters because a lot of folks got a dog a couple years ago.
And then we thought, oh my God, what did I do? Right? I did that. I did it. I mean, love them, but yeah. Hi, I'm Laura Riley, and this is Research Matters, a show about Cornell researchers who are tackling some of the world's toughest problems and finding solutions that make a real difference in our everyday lives. Today we're joined by Dr. Elisha Frye, Associate Professor of Practice in the Department of Population Medicine and Diagnostic Sciences at the College of Veterinary Medicine. We're going to talk about how diagnostic labs, field veterinarians, researchers, and policymakers join forces to build resilient systems that protect animal health, reduce disease spillover into humans, and support sustainable farming. Welcome. So good to have you here.
Thank you.
All right. So first thing, I would love to hear a little bit about what the Animal Health Diagnostic Center does.
Sure. So the New York State Veterinary Diagnostic Lab is housed at the College of Veterinary Medicine within Cornell University. And we are a commercial lab, and we accept samples from veterinarians that they collect from their animal patients.
Across all species?
All species.
Okay.
We are funded partially by the New York State Department of Agriculture. And so one of our main missions is to support animal agriculture. And in New York, there's a lot of dairy cows. So we do get a lot of samples from veterinarians taking care of dairy cows. We also get samples from beef cows. There's a big horse industry in New York State. There's a lot of different types of horses that are ridden for different reasons. There's race horses and there's pleasure horses. We also get samples from sheep and goat, pigs, of course, cats and dogs. And we get samples from New York State, but also from across the country and also from across the world. And we do testing on wildlife. So we test for the DEC, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So we have a nice smattering of different populations and species of animals, from birds to mammals.
So for wild animals, what kinds of things would you be testing for?
So we test deer for chronic wasting disease. Mm-hmm. We test...
So would that be a hunter? How would that... What's the process for that?
In some cases, someone might report, like, I found a dead deer in my backyard, or I found 20 dead birds. That seems weird. So something that is atypical might prompt the DEC to want to test. There is some hunter harvested testing of deer samples during hunting season. And so we have a fish PhD who, if there's a large die-off of fish in the state, he'll go and investigate why the fish died. We have a poultry veterinarian who specializes just in poultry. And then there's my group, which is 4 veterinarians, and we are more on the domestic mammals. So we field calls from veterinarians about sick domestic animals.
So what kinds of things for a cat or a dog, what would they be testing for?
Yeah, we can do anything from routine screening, like if you just want to make sure that your cat has normal blood work, that the kidneys are functioning and the liver is functioning, we can just do normal blood work on the cat. If a dog has a urinary tract infection, we could test the urine and see if there's something in the urine, that kind of testing.
Why is this important? Why is it important to test domesticated animals? I think we probably all know because we love our cats and dogs,
right.
or bovine, sampling, or even wild animals. Why is that an important thing to do?
I think it's very multifaceted, but one of the main goals is to monitor for certain diseases that might be of alarm. Like, there's certain diseases that we don't have in the country because if we did, they would be bad for our food supply. And so we're constantly monitoring to make sure that these diseases don't appear.
What would be a disease that we're trying to keep out?
So the obvious one for me is foot and mouth disease.
Okay.
And folks might remember that from England in the early 2000s.
Or mad cow?
Mad cow is a different one. But so those are 2 different viruses that we don't have in the U.S.
I feel like I often have foot in mouth disease, personally.
You might have hand, foot, and mouth disease. So that's different. I remember when my kids were little, like, everyone's saying foot and mouth, but it's a different thing. But so foot and mouth disease is a virus that just affects cattle. It doesn't affect humans.
So do you have to report to the CDC and then they're tracking nationally, or where does the information go?
That's a good question. So our lab reports to the USDA.
Okay.
So we are in a network of laboratories. They're called non-laboratories. And so there's like 60 of them in the US. And if we detect something that we need to report to the USDA, we actually send that sample to them. And so then they can track all of the diseases more centralized. So it's really important that we have this funneling of the non-labs to the USDA so they can track, like, if we get a virus from New York and then we get another virus from Georgia, are they the same or have they changed at all? So it's really
just
important.
Like genetically, is there a shift? So do you have to work then with like state epidemiologists, or like how does it integrate?
Yeah,
so that we have a national picture.
Sure. We work really closely with this. So there's state veterinarians. There's like different state veterinarians. Some are doing public health and some are doing more animal related stuff. And so, yeah, we work with all those folks. And the states also work with the USDA veterinarians. So there's a big network.
All right. So zoonotic is a word that we heard many, many times in the recent past. And I don't think everyone is crystal clear on what that is.
So zoonotic just means a disease that's transmitted from an animal to a human or from a human to an animal. So that's what zoonotic means.
And is that one of the chief things that you're concerned about, or that you're tracking some of this stuff to kind of be aware of?
So we don't test human samples, but I am really fascinated by diseases that jump species, including from humans to animals and animals to humans. I think that's really interesting. But my lane is kind of the animal component of it.
Okay. So are there, to go back to that though, are there certain species that tend to jump, or certain viruses that tend to jump species, or what are those?
Yeah, I think for that, avian influenza is kind of the low-hanging fruit. That's the one that seems to jump species.
Okay, so avian flu is definitely something that everyone has been kind of on everyone's minds. It's in headlines all the time. So I guess my first question specifically about avian flu is it's a virus that exists in wild bird populations and they're fine. How does it get from those wild bird populations into domesticated bird populations, turkeys, laying hens?
Right.
How does that happen?
Yeah. So the aquatic birds are the reservoir. That's where the virus hangs out and it doesn't make them sick. And then there's these big migratory bird patterns every year where they come, from Eurasia and then they fly through North America and then they can bring the virus to domestic birds. Sometimes a wild animal might eat a wild bird and that wild animal could get the virus that way. A wild bird could, fly into an area where there's domestic poultry and their droppings could spread the virus. So something like that could occur. And that's kind of how these viruses are spread between species.
Interesting. Well, so someone said, so I know that turkeys are really susceptible, and like Minnesota is a big turkey state. And they often are indoor, outdoor, so it seems like it's harder to protect them entirely from migratory birds that fly over. But someone said to me that climate change is causing small shifts in migratory bird patterns, and that may be contributing to avian flu. Is that anything you've heard?
I guess I'm not really the migratory bird patterns. I know that there's 4 flyways across the U.S. And then every around January, that's when they start to migrate. So we start to worry about a new influenza or more influenza coming during the migratory season. I don't know much about climate change impacting those flyways, but I could assume that would be a reasonable concern.
All right. Well, so in terms of climate change, you deal with a lot of, with cows. How is that putting pressure on cow populations, or how is it making things harder for dairy folks or cattlemen? Yeah,
I always thought it was interesting that Florida is a huge dairy state because you think it's really hot in Florida. And the Holstein, which is the breed of cow that we have, the black and white cow that we're all familiar with, they like to be cold. They actually don't like to be hot. So heat stress is a legitimate concern for a cow. They're making tons of milk every day. It's like the equivalent of running a marathon. So we need to worry about heat abatement. We have to keep these cows cool. That's factor that we have to take into account when we're caring for them. Also, there's a lot of movement of cattle these days. We have a lot of large farms, and some of the farms, they might milk the cows, but they don't take care of the babies. And so then those cows are being transported. The baby calves are being transported to a different state. So we can have disease transmission, but we can also have just the stress of movement impacting the health of the calves. And then they're arriving at a different facility with a different, management style so that they can take care of all these baby calves. And then at some point, those calves go back to the farm.
Yeah, so there's the cow-calf operation, the kind of middle section of that animal's life that, is somewhere else, and then they're finished somewhere or on a feedlot or whatever. So is that introducing additional, pressures in terms of, bacterial problems or viral problems?
Yeah. So you can have a bacteria in New York State, and it travels with the calf to Kansas, right? And so now it's moved. So that bacteria has moved itself with the calf, in the trailer. And then it can maybe spread it to the other calves in Kansas, which might have come from Colorado. So we can have a lot of like mixing of pathogens when these animals are moved. And then maybe before the calf, once it's bigger, is going to go home, then we've got like a new bug that it's gotten in Kansas that it's going to then bring back to New York. So there's a lot of animal movement.
So it feels like it's like the kids going to preschool for the first time, so that everyone gets sick all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think bees are in your your wheelhouse, but it seems like that's when bees are tracked to the almond fields or whatever, orchards or whatever, that often it's the commingling of all of these bees from all over the place that may cause some of the problems bees have had, varroa mites and colony collapse and all that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so going back to cows, what kinds of things are you testing for New York State cows? What are the big problems that arise for cows in our state?
Sure. So the things that get me excited are like when there's something terrible that happens, like 10 cows die overnight, and we want to know what happened to those cows. So we're doing...
What's the likely suspect there?
So when a lot of cows die, I always worry about a clostridial. You might have heard of blackleg, or like tetanus is another type of clostridial. And so there's a lot of clostridials. It's a bacteria that's kind of everywhere. And so that can kill a large number of cows really quickly. So a veterinarian might call me and say, this farmer had a catastrophe and we need to figure out what the cause was. And so we'll talk about what the causes could be and what samples he needs to send us so that we can do the testing at the lab to get the diagnosis and help the farmer.
So what's the most unusual thing you've seen? And is there like a special like bat phone that you have to pick up when like some kind of like cataclysmic finding has, threatens a whole population?
Yeah. The most interesting thing, I think when the bird flu jumped to the cattle, one of the veterinarians on the ground sent samples to our lab. And so we were one of the first labs who found it in the milk. And I don't think anybody thought that the bird flu was going to jump from wild birds into cow milk.
All right. So I know that people listening to this are gonna kind of like freak out because like, wait, what? I have to worry about. So talk a little bit about, just from a consumer perspective, do you have to worry about cheese? Do you have to worry about milk? Do you have to worry about beef?
Pasteurization kills the virus. So
Period.
If you drink pasteurized milk products, then you are not going to get.
So is this yet another reason to not drink raw milk?
This is yet another reason. In addition to a number of bacteria that can live in raw milk, now we've got a virus. Yeah. And the same for poultry products. So, raw diets are popular for feeding your pet, but there have been cats that have gotten avian influenza from eating raw poultry products.
And do they die of it? What happens to a cat?
Yeah, cats do die of it. They can get neurologic, so basically their brain can swell and they can die. This also happens to wild carnivores. So there's been like wild animals that have also had this, foxes, and there's been actually a huge number of different species of wildlife affected by avian flu. But the kitty cats, unfortunately, it affects their brain. The virus goes to the brain, and then they can succumb.
Wow. All right. So Cornell talks a lot about kind of One Health. I think that's kind of one of its big missions, or like Atkinson. There are a lot of researchers who are working on this kind of idea of One Health, that kind of humans, animals, environment, it's all linked. So from your perspective, from the daily work that you do, like how do all those things come together? How do human behaviors change animal, zoonotic possibilities, or, animal health overall? Yeah.
I think at the lab, I feel like it's my job to stay up to date on what's going on. What are veterinarians seeing? What are their clients, which are the pet owners, coming to them about? And so just being aware of all of those things and knowing what's up and coming is important for me to then be able to look for diseases. During COVID, a lot of people got dogs. And so then there was like an upswing in purchasing of pets. And so a lot of people had puppies. And then now we've got maybe not as many animals leaving shelters because a lot of folks got a dog a couple of years ago.
And then we thought, oh my God, what did I do? Right? I did it. I mean, love them, but yeah.
Right. And so then maybe these dogs didn't get like the social interactions that they typically would have if everybody was hanging out more. And so now we've got dogs that maybe have behavioral issues, which I don't really have to deal with, but there are other veterinarians who specialize in behavior. And so then you've got like these kind of, repercussions from bigger events in society that impact all aspects of veterinary medicine.
So I imagine that technology has affected your world and that there are new diagnostic tools that you're using and that have made things swifter or probably made communicating with other people faster. What kinds of things do you use? Like, what are the tools?
Yeah, I think just, cell phones and being able to take a really nice picture of an animal or a video even of an animal when you're out examining it or in the field, and then sending that to the diagnostic lab. And then we can look at that and it will help us hone in what we think might be happening with the animal. There's also newer diagnostic techniques. Sequencing is kind of the up and coming thing, which is when we can just look at the entire, sample and see what's in it. In the olden days, it was that we had to grow everything on a culture plate, right? Mm-hmm. And so now we've advanced beyond that, and we can use a lot of technology to get deeper into samples and to get more answers, sometimes too many, right? Like maybe we'll find something that actually isn't significant, right? And so then we have to realize
that. Well, it's like human diagnoses, right? Sometimes it's like, yes, you have the pituitary tumor, but you're not going to die of that. Right?
Yeah. Or even some viruses that don't cause disease, but then it's there. And so then we're like, and so we have to look into that.
So is there an area that you are especially concerned about in terms of, a vulnerability in our system?
I think during the government shutdown, I was impacted because these monthly meetings that we'd have with the USDA didn't happen. And so that loss of information, I might find out about something on the news that we would usually talk about in these monthly meetings, but then without the monthly meetings, we don't get to have like a scientific discussion about that, or I don't get to find out from the source. So I think these structures that we have to kind of safeguard the human health and the animal health are really important. And when we have government shutdowns, we miss out on all of that.
Yeah, no, that sounds terrifying. Okay, and we're getting close to the end, but okay. I would love to give a little bit more information for consumers, kind of how to be savvier about things like animal diseases. I mean, we said a little bit about raw milk. We said a little bit about raw animal food or pet food. Anything else that people should that they can do to just be a little safer in their daily practices?
Even the most basic thing, like just rinsing your vegetables. I think people always think like bacteria come from meat products, but actually there have been contaminations of like the lettuce. Like everyone remembers the lettuce that happened a few years ago. So just, doing those basic things, hand washing, preparing your food properly, cooking things to the right temperature, that will safeguard yourself against getting something from food. And unfortunately, all bacteria is around us, right? It's part of the world. We need it. But we also need, some of them are going to make us sick. So I think just some basic things like that can go a long way.
I guess I wanted to ask one final question. So we're getting better at predicting and stopping outbreaks. Do we have systems in place kind of in the event of a big outbreak of something or a zoonotic, an unexpected, what are the tools that we've developed to disseminate information, and, how does Cornell participate in that, or how does your lab work to participate?
Yeah, I think having that robust system where we're sending samples to the USDA, and then they would make the decision on how to control the thing. So I see my role as like I'm seeking the information and finding the things, but I don't make any of the policies, which so that's kind of my area. For some of the diseases, there's stockpiles of vaccines, but then if we have a disease we don't know about, right, then we're less prepared, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been wonderful. You have been listening to Research Matters from Cornell University. I'm Laura Riley. If you like this episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and share it with a friend who loves facts as much as you do. Thanks for listening. And remember, when research meets purpose, we move closer to a healthier, fairer world. Elisha, thank you so much.
Thank you.